Our subject is learning to stay. Really, that's the essence of it, is learning to stay present. But the truth is, anyone who's meditated even one day learned fast that we almost are never present. I remember really clearly when I was first given the instruction, oh, it's very simple, just sit down, get comfortable. That's the first wonderful instruction. Relax, that's the other impossible task. Get comfortable, relax. Be aware of your breath. And when your mind wanders, just come back and just stay present with your breath. So I thought that will be easy. And then I went and someone sat up in front and hit the gong. And then I tried it. And what happened was, I wasn't with one single breath until they hit the gong again to end the session. That I had just spent the whole period lost in thought. Now, at that time, I thought that was some particular failing of mine, and that if I just stuck with meditation, very soon I would be able to be a perfect meditator, stay with every breath. I'll maybe occasionally be distracted by a little something now and then, but mostly I would just stay present. So now let's see, how many years later is this? It's quite a lot of years later. I mean, it might be 30 years later or something like that. So you'd think that I would be really good at it, right? Well, in some sense, I am really good at it. But what I've learned is that doesn't mean that I'm not thinking all the time. That's a strange thing. I seem to have an extremely busy mind. And there's a lot of activity, but it's not I remember very well how it used to be. But the fact is that all kinds of things happen when you meditate. Everything from, shortness of breath or strange visual images, physical discomfort, emotional upheavals, to peak experiences, all of that. And the basic attitude is no big deal. Or there's something that actually I hope to be repeating over and over. And this is like a core theme. It's a line of one of the morning chants, that whatever arises is fresh, the essence of realization. And this is actually our view, that whatever arises in our body, in the confused mind, it's regarded as the essence of realization. Whatever arises, if you cling to it as, I'm doing well now, or this is how it's supposed to be, that's adding something extra. And if you panic or criticize, that's adding something extra. On the other hand, even the panic and the praise are whatever arises is fresh, the essence of realization. You see, I think that's why I have this lousy meditation that it doesn't bother me anymore. Because whatever arises is the fresh, and I know that's absolutely true. And, so I just have this hopelessly unworkable, non-meditative mind, and I've devoted my whole life to it. And talked to millions of people about it. It's like completely absurd, But, actually what I also notice about the few people I've met in my life that I consider to be completely awake, they learn to stay. And that's what you feel. You feel this sense of eternal present. They don't go off anywhere like we do. They just stay. And that seems to be what enlightenment is. It's the simplest thing and the most profound thing at the same time. I recently heard a teaching by Ziger Kongtrul Rinpoche, who I'm studying with now. And it's interesting because Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, my main teacher, he also used a similar analogy. What they both said is that we are all like young children who have a bad case of scabies. And we're old enough to scratch them, but not old enough to know that when you scratch it, it spreads and then it gets worse. And this is an analogy for what we all do. We have discomfort, the itch that goes along with the scabies. And then we scratch it. And we scratch it, and what happens? We get very temporary symptom relief. And it spreads. And pretty soon we're scratching all over our whole body and the whole thing is bleeding and we're really suffering. So in this analogy, the child is taken to the doctor who gives a prescription. And this is like going to a spiritual teacher and being given the teachings, and in particular being given the meditation. Learning to stay is a description of meditation. Learning to stay is also a description of staying with the itch and not scratching. In other words, scratching is a way of turning away from, trying to get away from, right? Trying to escape the fundamental discomfort, the itch, which we could also call insecurity or just that bad feeling that comes over us. So we itch, but then we go to the doctor and the doctor says, you have scabies. Scabies itch. If you keep scratching them, then it gets worse. So what you have to do is to stop scratching and apply this medicine, the teachings and the practice. Ways to sort of work with the itch. Then you can heal. And then what I loved about this analogy is that both the Rinpoche said, if the child wants to heal, and if the child has enough love for themselves and wants to heal, they will follow the doctor's instructions. And they'll go through the discomfort of feeling an itch that you're not scratching. And then gradually they have their own reward. It isn't really the doctor that gets rewarded or anybody else. It's you that experiences that the rash starts to get less and the urge to scratch gets less and then the itch starts itching less. And as any of us know, particularly who have had really strong addictions, this can take a very long time. Nevertheless, it's the only way, because if you keep scratching, then not only does the itch get worse, but you find yourself more and more in hell, basically, because your life becomes more and more out of control and misery-based. Either you numb out or you start craving things. That's mine, really, as I get into like craving and pleasure. Or we have a more aggressive style of scratching, where we obsess and rage about other people or self-hatred and those kind of things. So those are the classic 3 styles of scratching, numb out, use aggression towards self or other, or this craving or seeking comfort, pleasure. And there's less and less ability to stay. So really, it comes down to this willingness to do something for yourself. Willingness to connect with your own strength, your own wisdom, and your own confidence, as opposed to just doing the habitual thing, which is going for the short-term symptom relief, which never addresses the root of the problem. So in the Buddhist teachings, I say that the root of the problem, the scabies themselves, is actually the self-absorption, this fear of being present. You go from being open, receptive to your mind and to your world and to other people, to your emotions, to the whole thing, which is a sort of a broad feeling and a far less reactive feeling, and it's a more at-home feeling. You go from that to going into a small dark room, or like an ostrich sticking its head in the sand. This is called ego, where everything gets extremely small. Buddhist teachings talk a lot about ego clinging. One of the words for it is the cocoon. And you just stay in there because you're afraid, basically, of your feelings and the things that life is going to trigger and the things that are going to come at you. And you know, if that strategy worked, then the Buddha wouldn't have really had to teach anything. You could just sort of protect yourself, which all living beings do, and then that would result in security and happiness and comfort, and there would be no problem. But what has been observed is that this going inward, this self-absorption, this trying to find zones of safety, creates suffering, terrible suffering, because it weakens us, and the world becomes more and more terrifying, and our mind and our emotions become more and more threatening as well. There's a lot of ways to talk about ego clinging, but in essence, it's the fact that we are never present. There's this sort of deep-seated, almost compulsion to distract ourselves, even when we're not having a major itch. What these analogies really point to is everybody has a little bit of scabies all the time. So there's like this background hum of uneasiness or boredom or restlessness. And someone like myself who spends a lot of time doing nothing, absolutely nothing, you go through this profound restlessness. And you realize it's primordial in sentient beings. This profound, deep restlessness. And the Buddhist explanation is it's because we're always seeking ground. That's the basis of what we call self-absorption or ego clinging. Always seeking something to hold on to. And what the Buddhist teachings say is the fundamental state actually is always changing, fluid and open, that the natural state is that it's unfixated and open and there really is nothing to hold on to. And that this is not bad news, and that there's no reason to freak out about this, but we all seem to be programmed in denial, basically. We don't like the insecurity. Someone said, insecurity is ego's take on the wide open, clear, unfettered, fresh space. And we find that extremely uncomfortable. It seems like everybody has this very basic insecurity, and that we experience as horrible, like dying. It's like I was in a situation in a retreat. You all think these retreats are these nice, peaceful places, right? I'll tell you, they're like tough. So especially group retreats. And so I was in this group retreat in this very close quarters, and there was one woman in the retreat, and she and I had been close friends, and she, well, let's not say what she did, let's say what happened with me. I felt that she hated me. And the most horrible thing in the world happened to me, which was that she wouldn't talk to me about it. And we were in this tiny place. We had to walk down these narrow corridors. There were only 8 women in this retreat. No way to get away from each other. She was very angry and she wouldn't talk to me. And that brought up feelings in me of not being okay. It was like it just triggered the whole thing. And I tried all the meditation techniques I had been teaching for years. I tried everything and nothing really got at it. So one night, because I couldn't sleep, I went up to the meditation hall and I sat all night long, and I wasn't really even meditating. I was just sitting in this kind of raw pain with almost no thoughts about it, like on fire practically. And then something happened. I guess I was involuntarily just staying because it was so painful I couldn't move. And something happened transformative, which is that I just had this completely clear insight that my whole personality, what we would call ego structure, was based on not wanting to go to that place. That everything I did, the way I smiled, the way I talked to people, the way I tried to please everybody, it was all to avoid going to that place. But I now feel that learning to stay, we do reach that place, the place that nobody wants to go, and our whole facade and our whole little song and dance that we do, our whole superficial shtick is based on not wanting to go to that place. And once you've touched it, basically you get pretty fearless, because then there's nothing to hide, and you're no longer invested in the ignorant dance of trying to move away from it constantly all the time. So what we're basically going to be doing is exploring that itch and learning to stay when we're itching or not itching. Often one of the first things that starts to sort of distract you is a literal itch. So you say, I'm just going to sit and I'm not going to scratch this itch, especially after you've heard this analogy. I'm just going to sit still and I'm just going to see this itch with curiosity and openness. And then your mind starts trying to convince you otherwise. If I don't itch this, I'm going to get seriously ill. And then this other little voice says, that's silly. Then you sort of sit there a little long. If I don't itch this, I'm going to go stark raving mad. And then maybe next one is, this is really stupid. What's the problem with itching? Then someone who's sitting up here in front says, if you have to itch, do it in slow motion and breathe in and out, about 10 times before you itch. And so now you've been given permission to itch, and then your mind wanders off and itch? What itch? It's gone. So I wish it was always that easy, that it just disappeared like that. But a lot of what we train in learning to stay with anything, with pleasant and unpleasant, always coming back to the openness and unobstructed quality of the present moment. Always coming back. What we train in is not struggling. And this is actually a big one, because like if you get into this war with I should itch, I shouldn't itch thing, then of course the itch becomes an obsession. So there's a tremendous emphasis in meditation, one on stabilizing your mind, just the willingness to take the medicine, the willingness to just come back, no matter whether the mind is going on and on about pleasure and comfort, or whether the mind is going on and on about aggression and resentment, or whether the mind is just numbing out. It doesn't really matter. We just keep coming back, and we work with the attitude of stabilizing or staying present as a kind of basic thread. But then within that, there's a big emphasis on kindness, friendliness, warmth, seeing what's happening. The gift that I've experienced is that whatever is happening, if you don't judge it, then there's some kind of ease with whatever happens. But if you call it good or bad, then you begin to get into this kind of war with yourself. So in the meditation, there's a basic instruction, but then there's also this attitude, which is so important, of basic warmth towards the whole situation, not judging what's happening, your mind or your emotions. So I thought we would do a short meditation, just to show you how hard it is. There's two purposes of this. One is to show you how funny it is, really, that it's so hard to just stay present even for a short period of time. The other is, though, that you will be present for moments, maybe longer, maybe even quite a long time. But don't be surprised if it's just a few seconds here and there. But in doing this meditation, which is going to be one of listening, in doing it, it's also introducing you to your own open awareness of your mind, introducing you to actually the space that already exists in your mind, that you can already tune into. And it's available to us all the time. Each time we really see something without a lot of talking to ourselves about it, each time we taste something, smell something, we know that experience, occasionally a sight. Sometimes it's something like the first flower in the spring, or a surprise view out a window, or something that just delights us. Someone suddenly gets up and starts dancing, and you're just like, wow. But different things in your experience, you have this direct experience. And what is experiencing? That's your wisdom. That's the space that always exists in your mind, the ability to just have a direct perception. And also when you love somebody, just that feeling of love or connection from the heart, that's your, we call Buddha nature or basic goodness. That ability to appreciate, very fundamental. And so in this exercise, we try to just listen. This is introducing us to, first of all, that it's not so easy to stay present, and secondly, that sometimes we are present, and that is our basic wisdom, our basic openness, our basic goodness that's connecting with the sound or the sight or the heart. So maybe get comfortable, relax. I'll hit the gong, and then just wait a moment and just listen to the sound of the gong. Now listen to the sound of the gong again, and try to listen to it all the way until it ends. Again. Now listen to the sounds in the distance, outside the room. Now listen to sounds in the room, maybe right next to you or close by. And just listen. It isn't that it's good or that it's bad. Just hear it. Now again, listen to the sound of the gong. Okay. So maybe from that, you saw that we have the capacity to listen. We have that capacity for attention or being present with a kind of alertness, listening to the gong, listening for it to end. On the other hand, our mind wanders off, right? Then the instruction, no matter whether the object of meditation is a sound, a taste, one's breath, which is the one we usually use, the instruction is, that's very interesting to see that. See that the mind wanders off. Then you come back, because the present is so precious and so profound. And also because if we don't have some reference point that we always come back to, then we never notice that we're distracted. We never notice that we're scratching. Most of us, we don't notice until we're actually bleeding all over our bodies. Maybe you keep scratching, but you know, you see, and you're present for the scratching. And then if you want to heal, you have the willingness, you have enough love for yourself, enough trust, enough confidence that you have the wisdom and the openness. Then your wisdom just begins to be activated more and more, and you yourself, you don't need anybody telling you. You yourself say, I don't want to die bleeding to death from all this scratching. I don't have to have one more scratch in order to already know what's happening here. I know. And then you also say, but, Pema dear, this is going to take a lot of courage, right? Yeah, it's going to take a lot of courage because I don't want to feel that itch. So, Pema dear, are you willing? It's sort of like that. And then you say, yeah, because I don't want to die bleeding to death from scratching, from my own unwillingness to heal. I think for many people, when you have a lot of pain in your life, whether it happens to you when you're young or it happens to you later, but crisis, trauma, a lot of pain of some kind, people who have this are usually the ones who get really serious about the spiritual path and are highly motivated to learning to stay. So really, it's a blessing in disguise. I think a lot of the spiritual path is about blessings in disguise. And it's a good expression to really keep in mind, because usually people who have no pain, everything is kind of like a game and fun and trendy or the latest thing or something. But then when the shit hits the fan, that's when you get really serious, because the stakes are very high. What we're doing by learning to stay is not only are we allowing ourselves to be open to ourselves and our life, so that something that is such a struggle becomes actually a source of such joy, but also your own wisdom into the chain reaction, into what actually heals, begins to come forth. And not only that, you actually begin to connect with the open, unobstructed clarity of your own being and of every moment. And there's some sense of glad to be alive. Glad to be alive. I can say that definitely. Glad to be alive. And I remember well when I wasn't glad to be alive. When my mind and my world was about the size of a postage stamp, and I was always unhappy and uneasy. And now I can say I'm glad to be alive to agreeable and glad to be alive to disagreeable. And I'm glad to be alive to sour and sweet and tingly and itchy and refreshing and cold and hot and the whole thing. And it doesn't matter that there's this voice that says, I don't like this, or I do like this. That's fine, That's also fine. But somehow open and at home with your body, with your mind, and with your world. And meditation is actually the means or the tools that we need. It goes beyond just healing from addiction and neurosis. It actually is that the present moment is the doorway to liberation, vastness, unobstructed quality of our mind. And we could experience the world that way. It's a kind of ordinary situation that sentient beings have almost in the DNA, this habituation to moving away from the present moment. Probably the most basic level is we think about things all the time and it takes us away. And Trungpa Rinpoche used to talk about the difference between fantasy and reality, meaning being present was some kind of contact with the immediacy of our experience. And he called that reality. And then fantasy, which is we're just lost in thought a great deal of the time. A great deal of the time. All those people driving on the freeways at 85 miles an hour, most of them are distracted. It's a little scary to think about it. There's some kind of automatic pilot that keeps you on the road and everything. But the norm is to be habituated in this pattern of leaving, not being fully present, not contacting the immediacy of our experience. And then the Buddhist teachings talk about many lifetimes and karma. They say, it's like that because for lifetime after lifetime, you've been strengthening that habit of distraction. Well, if you don't buy multiple lifetimes, just this lifetime is enough to know we all strengthen that habit. So we get to whatever age we are, and our habituation has been to strengthen the habit of leaving, always distracted. And actually, unfortunately, we get a lot of comfort from leaving. Lost in thought, fantasies, plans. It gives us a lot of security and ground. So we're very habituated to it. pretty much we like it, and it gets stronger. So the definition of habituation, which is a very down-home way of really talking about karma, the definition of habituation is that whatever you do, you're strengthening that habit. That if you say a mean word, you're strengthening the habit of meanness. Suppose you're angry, and the instruction with meditation would be that you would stay with the underlying feeling, but you wouldn't feed it with your discursive mind about how wrong somebody was or how wrong you were. But generally speaking, we're often running with our thoughts, usually then with our speech and our actions. We keep habituating ourselves and making the pattern stronger. So the definition of habituation is getting better at it. We kind of get to choose what we want to get better at, and mindlessly we get better at things that we don't like about ourselves, interestingly enough, like our out-of-control anger or our low self-esteem or our self-pity or our fearfulness. And then the more we strengthen it, the more we do it. So it's circular and it just keeps going and going. The urge arises, we do it, then it makes it stronger, and then we do it more. So we keep strengthening the habituation of patterns which cause us a lot of suffering. And they tend to fall into those three types of scratching I was talking about. We habituate ourselves in numbing out, or we habituate ourselves in getting even and revenge and angry thoughts, aggression, or we habituate ourselves to make patterns of craving and wanting and needing and grasping onto things. In Buddhism, those are taught as the main ones that cause us suffering. So this habit to be elsewhere is addressed by learning to stay, and meditation has to do with that. But very key to this is that the average person, when we see and that we are so distracted, and when we begin to see what we do, that's more ammunition for low self-esteem or self-denigration or self-hatred even. Instead of it being of benefit to us, we twist it against ourselves, like pointing the finger at ourselves or giving the finger to ourselves, whatever you want. And the sense of being fundamentally defective in some way gets stronger. And in fact, the whole point is to notice what's happening with kindness, sense of humor, gentle touch, but also be almost ruthlessly honest, moving toward the place of no self-deception or nothing to hide from yourself. So if you can combine that moving in the direction of nothing to hide from yourself with humor and loving kindness, then the whole thing begins to transform your being. I'm going to introduce you to a Tibetan word, and if you went and looked for teachings on this, you wouldn't find any unless you have listened to the teachings of Zigor Khantrul Rinpoche, who I'm studying with. I give full, complete credit to Zigor Khantrul because he's the one who has given lots of teachings on this, continues to do so, and it's had a very strong influence on my life and on my teachings. So this is a teaching on a Tibetan word, Shenpa, S-H-E-N, as in nut, nut case. S-H-E-N-P-A. Shenpa. And actually it's taught about a lot in Buddhism, but not quite in the style that Zigor Khantrul has been presenting it. The usual translation of the word Shenpa is attachment. If you were to look it up in a Tibetan dictionary, you would find that the definition was attachment. But the word attachment absolutely doesn't get at what it is. And so Zigor Khantrul said, let's just not use that translation because it's incomplete and it doesn't touch the magnitude of Shenpa and the effect that it has on us. So if I were translating Shenpa, it'd be very hard to find a word, but I'm going to give you a few. One word might be hooked. how we get hooked. We get hooked and then we get stuck. So everyone likes to hear teachings on getting stuck and how to get unstuck. Because it's so common to feel stuck. Guess what? You can meditate for a long, long time and you still get stuck. In terms of having the scabies and that itch that goes along with that and scratching it, Shenpa is the itch. And it's the urge to scratch. So urge is another word. The urge to smoke that cigarette, the urge to overeat, have one more drink, or where your addiction is. And it gets into everyday experience. Somebody says a mean word to you, and then something in you tightens. That's the Shenpa. And then it starts to spiral into low self-esteem or blaming them or anger at them, denigrating yourself, then words and actions, and maybe if you have strong addictions, you just go right for your addiction to cover over that bad feeling that arose when someone said this mean word to you. This is a mean word that gets you, hooks you. You know, another might not affect you, but we're talking about when it touches that sore place. That's a Shenpa. The fundamental root Shenpa is what in Buddhism is called ego clinging. And we experience it as this tightening, and as self-absorption gets very strong at that point. So the fundamental root Shenpa is what in Buddhism is called ego clinging, or self-absorption, or cocoon. And then the branch Shenpas are all the different styles of scratching and so forth like that. So someone criticizes you. They criticize your work. They criticize your appearance. They criticize your child. And Shenpa, almost co-arising. As soon as those words have registered, boom, it's there. And it's like a tightening. Shenpa is not the thoughts. Ziglar Kantro made a big thing of it. He said it's closer to an emotion. It's pre-verbal. Then it breeds thoughts really quickly. But Shenpa is not the thoughts. He said it's more like an emotion, but I think it's even pre-emotion in a way. It just kind of like is that. So that you can feel it happening, which often people just starting with this can. You feel it happening sometimes. Say like at the monastery at Gampo Abbey, people were finding in the dining room. Someone would come sit next to them, and of course you have kind of a pretty intimate relationship with everybody there living in community. And they could feel the Shenpa just because this person sat down next to them because they had some kind of thing going about this person. Not to mention, you know, they don't really have any particular Shenpa with anybody at the table, but then someone does something or says something to them or to someone else or something, and they just feel this closing down, and they're hooked. Now, if you catch it at that level, it's very workable, and then you have the possibility to have this enormous curiosity about this urge to do the habitual thing, to strengthen the habituation. You can feel it, and it's never new. One thing about Shenpa is it's never new. It always has a familiar taste in the mouth. It has a familiar smell. It's like when you begin to get the hang of it, you feel like this has been happening forever. It causes you to feel the fundamental underlying insecurity of the human experience that is inherent in a changing, shifting, impermanent, illusory world, as long as we are habituated to want to have ground under our feet. So someone says this thing which triggers our conditioning and so forth, and we don't really have to go into the history of why it happens. So this is not self-analysis of why or what the trauma was or anything. It's just, oh, and you feel yourself tightening. And then, generally speaking, it's more common that you already are well into the scratching by the time you notice it. And in a way, the scratching itself is part of the Shenpa too, although we're beginning to move out further. But it's all part of a kind of a chain reaction that starts with the tightening that happens involuntarily. Then there's the urge to move away from it in some habitual way, which is usually in the mind initially, and it's something that you say to yourself about them. Or, as I say, often it's accompanied by this just bad feeling. And in the West, it's very, very common at that point to turn it against yourself. Something wrong with me. And maybe it's still nonverbal at this point, but it's already pregnant with a kind of a little gestalt, with a little drama. And what's very interesting is you begin to notice it really quickly in other people. You're having a conversation at work with somebody, and their face is sort of open and they're listening, and you say something, you're not quite sure what it is you just said, or maybe you know what it is you just said. It doesn't necessarily have to be mean or anything, but you see their eyes cloud over, or you see their jaw tense, or you just somehow touched something. You're seeing their Shenpa, and they may not be aware of it at all, but from your side, in Buddhism we call it prajna. It's like this clear seeing of what's really happening, not involved with your storyline and trying to get ground under your feet. You see that happening to them, and there's some kind of basic intelligence that we all have, that if you're really smart and you're not too caught in your Shenpa, you somehow give the situation some space, because you know that they've just been triggered. They've just been hooked. You can just see it in their eyes or their body language. And you know that if you're trying to make a point about something that needs to happen in the office, or trying to make a point with one of your children or your partner or something, nothing is going to get through at this point, because they're shutting down and they're closing off because of Shenpa. They've been hooked. But you just recognize what's happening there. And this is a situation where with Buddhist meditation you can actually learn how to open up the space. One method is just start to be quiet and start to meditate right on the spot, and just go to your breath and be there openly with some kind of curiosity about them and openness to them. And you might have to sort of change your way of talking at that point and say, how do you feel about that? And they may say, it's fine. No problem. But you just know enough to try to shut up and say, let's talk about this this afternoon or tomorrow or something, because it's not the time. And if there's someone who's a practitioner and they're working on themselves, such as a monastery, we have a wonderful situation because everybody's working with this. And you don't have to say, I see your Shenpa. In which case they probably sock it to you. No one likes to have it pointed out particularly. Although some people would start, they'd say, when you see it in me, just pull your earlobe or something. And often partners will do that with each other. Or if you see it in yourself, and I'm not picking it up, have some little sign so that we know that maybe this isn't the time to continue this discussion. You don't always have this luxury to not continue the discussion, but at least you have some prajna, some clear seeing that's not ego involved about what will heal or open the relationship and open up the space. But habituation, which is ego-based, does just the opposite. It makes matters worse. This is one of the definitions of ego. It makes matters worse because you feel a compulsion in your own particular style to fill up the space and either push your point through or try to smooth the waters. And everything makes it worse at that point, usually. So somehow learning how to just open up the space without putting your particular form of scratching into the equation. So this Shenpa is really I think it's such a helpful teaching because it really shows you that you have lots of addictions, that we all have addictions. As someone said, for everyone, there's a sort of background static of slight unease, maybe fidgetiness or restlessness or boredom, that is sort of background static. And so we begin to use things to try to get some kind of relief from that unease. So something like food or alcohol, drugs or sex or working, shopping, whatever we do, which perhaps in moderation would actually be very delightful. But what happens is these things become imbued with addictive quality because we empower them with the idea that they will bring us comfort and they will remove this unease. And so we never get at the root. We have to really experience the unease. We have to experience the itch. We have to experience the shenpa and then not act it out. And this is very interesting because this business of not acting out, which I will call refraining, it's also called renunciation in the spiritual teachings. And it's interesting. Tibetan word for renunciation is shenluk. S-H-E-N, as in nutcase, L-U-K. And it means turning shenpa upside down or shaking it up. So renunciation isn't about renouncing food or sex or work or relationship or whatever it is. It's not really talking about the things themselves. It's talking about the shenpa. So what we renounce or what we refrain from is the shenpa. And the interesting thing is there is no way to really renounce shenpa because, as I say, someone looks at you in a certain way, or let's just face it, you hear a certain song, you have a certain smell, you walk into a certain room, and boom. And you know it has nothing to do with the present, and nevertheless, there it is. It's involuntary, always in the Buddhist teachings. It's not really trying to cast something out, but about seeing clearly and fully experiencing the shenpa. And then, if there's the willingness to see clearly and experience, then the prajna begins to click in. It is just innate in us. It begins to see the whole chain reaction, and there's some wisdom that is based on, to use modern language, a fundamental desire for wholeness or healing, which has nothing to do with ego grasping. It has to do with wanting to connect and live from your basic goodness, your basic openness. It begins to become a stronger force than the shenpa, and you stop the chain reaction. So those of you who have had or have still strong addictions and are working all the time with that urge, with that craving, with that drive to do something self-destructive yet again, you know that there has to be the willingness to fully acknowledge what's happening, and then the willingness to refrain from having just one more drink, or refrain from binge eating, or whatever it is, but that has to be done in some way that you equate it with loving kindness towards yourself, and friendliness and warmth towards yourself, rather than you equate it with some kind of straitjacket that you're putting on yourself, because then you get into the struggle. But you do know that if you're alcoholic or have been alcoholic or a recovering alcoholic, you do know that actually you have to stop drinking. Because in your case, one little sip doesn't quite do it, in terms of ending the cycle. My daughter-in-law, at the age of 35, they gave her 2 months to live from alcohol poisoning, what they call cirrhosis of the liver. And she lived. It's 5 years later or whatever. But she had to really hit bottom. And I'll tell you, she was blown up like a blimp. She was this horrible yellow-green color, and her eyes were bright orange. And she would not stop drinking. And I would get her to the hospital, and they would drain out bottles and bottles and bottles of fluid. And as soon as they would allow her to go, she'd go home and drink again. Why do we do those things? We all do those things to that degree or lesser. Why? It's stupid. But the reason we do it is because we imbue that drink or that scratching in whatever form with comfort. And we all have a lot of situations like that. Like, for instance, I remember seeing my ex-husband, who I was so in love with when we were married, and then he left me, and it was such a trauma. It was years later, and, you know, my life had gone in such a better direction for me. Things had opened up so much, and I didn't associate that marriage or him or anything anymore with happiness. And yet, if I would get a letter from him and see his handwriting or something, this deep yearning and longing would come up. And then I realized it's not even Jim. He's the archetypal one who loves you, you know. And you're yearning for that. And that was the Shenpa there. In order to move away from the basic uneasiness, we find comfort in certain things which become imbued with addictive quality. And then all we're getting is this short-term symptom relief. And that we are willing to sometimes die to keep getting short-term symptom relief. So this is the same thing. It doesn't have to be substance abuse. It can be saying mean things. Maybe you never say mean things, but you think them all the time. It can be critical mind. Let's just talk about critical mind. It's a major Shenpa. And it all starts because you walk into a room or someone does something and you feel this tightening. It's triggering some kind of old habituated pattern. And you're not even thinking about it at all. But basically what's happening is you don't want to feel that. It's some kind of real deep uneasiness. And so your habituation is to start dissing them, basically criticizing them. And you get a kind of puffed up satisfaction out of this. It makes you feel in control. And it's this short-term symptom relief. On the other hand, the more you do it, you also begin to feel simultaneously like you're poisoning yourself with your own mean-mindedness. And yet, do you stop? No, you don't stop. Because why? Because you associate it with relief from this feeling. You associate it basically with comfort. So this is the Shenpa syndrome. So there's Shenpa to positive experience, Shenpa to negative experience, Shenpa to everything, really. But in meditation, I'll talk about Shenpa to positive experience and Shenpa to negative experience. If you've meditated at all before this weekend, you will recognize yourself here. You meditated and you felt a sort of settling, a sort of calmness, and a sort of sense of well-being. So, and maybe thoughts came and went, but they didn't hook you and you were able to come back. There wasn't a sense of struggle. Afterwards, Shenpa. I did it right. I got it right. That's how it should always be. That's the model. And then it either builds arrogance or conversely it builds poverty mind because next session is nothing like that. So then you have the bad one, which is not bad. It's just that you sat there and you were very discursive and you were obsessing about someone at home, at work, something you have to do. You worried and you fretted or you got into fear or anger or anyway, you were wildly discursive and you were trying to rope in this wild horse who refused to be tamed. And you just felt like it was a horrible meditation session. So you have this meditation that by your standards is bad, and it isn't bad. It was just what it was. But then the Shenpa, that's where we get caught. That's where we get hooked. That's where it gets sticky. That's where, to use Buddhist language, as long as there's Shenpa, it's strengthening ego clinging. Good experience, ego gets stronger. Bad experience, ego gets stronger. Ego is sort of an abstract word to us, but Shenpa, maybe we can resonate. Good experience, Shenpa gets stronger about good. Bad experience, Shenpa gets stronger about bad. So Shenpa is sort of leading us towards what is really meant by not attached to this world. It doesn't have anything to do with this world. It has to do with Shenpa. Hooked. And all we're trying to do is not always be feeling that uneasiness. But now someone is saying, well, then the way to do it is to experience the uneasiness completely and fully without the Shenpa. Go into the present moment. Learn to stay. Learn to stay with the uneasiness. Learn to stay with the tightening. Learn to stay with the itch of Shenpa. Learn to stay with the scratching wherever you catch it, so that this chain reaction of habituation just doesn't rule our lives, and the patterns that we consider unhelpful aren't getting stronger, stronger, stronger. So in meditation, you can expect, you will see that you have Shenpa to good experience, Shenpa to bad experience, but maybe this teaching will help you to see that and have a sense of humor, and because this is the first step, acknowledging or seeing. Because you can't have the basis to stay if you don't first see. The work we have to do is coming to acknowledge that we're tensing or that we're hooked. The earlier you catch it, the easier it is to work with it. But nevertheless, if you catch it when you're already all worked up, that's good enough. Hard to interrupt that momentum. So sometimes you go through the whole cycle. Maybe you even catch yourself all worked up and you still do it. The urge is so strong, the craving is so strong, the hook is so great, the sticky quality is so habituated, we feel like we can't do anything about it. But what you can do then is, after the fact, you go and you sit down in meditation and you rerun the story. You know, maybe you start with remembering the all worked up feeling, and then you get in touch with that. So you can go into the Shenpa in retrospect. So these teachings help us to at least get a bigger perspective on what's happening. There could be 2 billion kinds of itch and 7 quadrillion types of scratching, but we just call the whole thing Shenpa. And in this way, this is what Buddhists mean when they say don't get caught in the content. Go to the underlying hooked quality, the sticky quality, the urge there, the attachment. So far I've introduced the idea that you recognize it. And I also have introduced, and I'll talk more about this, this refraining from strengthening the Shenpa, which is usually doing the habitual thing, your style of scratching. And then that's when the practice really gets interesting, is what do you do when you don't do the habitual thing? You're left with that urge much more in your face. So we have to know how to practice with that, and we'll be talking more about that. But essentially, if you want to think of it in terms of 4 R's, it's recognizing, refraining, which simply means not going down that road, relaxing into the underlying feeling, and then something called resolve, which means you do this again and again and again. It's not a one-shot deal. You resolve that in the future you'll just keep working this way. So if you just had to do it once and that was it, that would be really wonderful. It would be so wonderful, because we all can do this a little bit. If we just had to do it a little bit and that was it, oh, wow. But it comes back, because we've been habituating ourselves to move away and really strengthening the urge for a long, long, long time. And it's not an overnight miracle that you just undo that habituation. It takes a lot of loving kindness, a lot of recognition with warmth. It takes a lot of learning how to refrain, and it takes a lot of willingness to stay present. Once you see what you do, how you get hooked and how you follow it and all of this, there's no way to be arrogant. So the whole thing sort of softens you up, humbles you in the best sense, and also begins to give you a lot of confidence in that you have this wisdom guide, so Gil Rinpoche calls it. Your own wisdom guide is your own mind and the fundamental aspect of your being. this prajna, or Buddha nature, basic goodness, that begins to be more and more activated, that you, from your own wisdom, begin to go more towards spaciousness and openness and unhabituatedness. But it doesn't happen quickly.